For a long time, I was incredibly hesitant of reboots or reimaginings of games. A lot of the time they can, in an attempt to modernise, lose that spark that made the original great. But there have been some recent exceptions like Doom or the more recent Wolfenstein games. So I went into God of War 2018 hopeful. I am pleased to say that they have nailed that balance of old and new here. It manages to take a series and breathe new life into it. Let's see why you should tear your way through this Norse world. God of War 2018 was developed by Sony Santa Monica and released in April of 2018. It takes Kratos, popularly known for slaughtering the entire Greek pantheon, and places him in a new landscape dominated by the gods of Norse mythology. It is a soft reboot of sorts. The Kratos of this game is the same as the previous games, but those events are far in the past. The setting is completely different, and there is a much more personal tone to the narrative. In the intervening years, Kratos has settled down, had a family. The journey picks up with the death of Kratos' wife, Faye. As her last wish, she tasks Kratos and their son, Atreus, with spreading her ashes at the highest peak in the realms. This sets in motion a journey that has you exploring the entirety of this different world. But as is to be expected, one of the main activities in this world is fighting, but the God of War combat is not the same as it once was. The combat of previous God of War titles was brutal, but graceful in a way too. All that twirling around and building combos had a very ribbon dancing vibe. This falls at the wayside in this game. First of all, it moves the camera closer into an over-the-shoulder position, lending the game a more personal feel. The enemies are right up in your face. It also means that you have less situational awareness. This is partially mediated by the enemy indicators, but it still makes the combat feel more intense and frenetic. You're still going to get air combos and over-the-top animations when you rip your enemies apart, but it all feels more barbaric now. The new approach to combat is personified by the new Leviathan axe. It is a heavy piece of kit that seems to tear chunks out of enemies. There ain't nothing graceful about it, but it's a hell of a lot of fun to use. Furthermore, you can throw it and recall it back to you at any time. Basically, I can't think of many things that are more satisfying in games than seeing your axe tear through a bunch of bad guys on the way back to your hand. You're going to be using this behemoth of a weapon on some really interesting opponents too. They hit a really good balance here, where enemies require tactics and different approaches to tackle, but they're enough fodder enemies that you never stop feeling like a whirlwind of death. The major bosses have a healthy dose of ridiculous bombast too. It does have a small problem with variety later in the game. They could have done with a few more types of enemies, but this doesn't get boring because you are constantly unlocking new abilities to play with in combat. There are a variety of different abilities that you can acquire throughout your journey in God of War. There are equipable skills that you can find like AoE stuns or freezes, and there's a ton of these things, and they can often have the ability to completely change the tide of battle. Now you can upgrade them, and you should, but I never invested so many resources into one thing that I felt like I couldn't experiment. Ultimately, that is what I did for the majority of the game. There are so many cool and useful abilities that you unlock throughout the skill tree that I could never hold them all in my head. Perhaps if I got good, I could, but it resulted in this interesting cycle where every now and again I would look at the skills I had and I would focus on one or two for a few fights, then switch. It kept the game fresh throughout. However, perhaps the most interesting thing about the combat introduced here is Atreus. Kratos' son is a constant companion and has an active role in combat. You can fire arrows with him and unlock abilities for him to utilise. You can shamble your way through without utilising him, but you're going to struggle, particularly in the late game. This creates a situation where you are innately invested in Atreus. You need him to do well. You get to see his personality play out as well, even when you're in combat. He even behaves differently as the story progresses. He gets better at it, but his attitude changes as well, and this is reflected in the way he fights. This subtle characterization is important because at its core, God of War is a personal story. God of War 3 was a great game, but there was not a moment where I felt a shred of empathy for Kratos. He is an unstoppable animal with little to no humanity, a simple funnel to pump catharsis through. God of War 2018 addresses this in an interesting way. Kratos is not a good dude, but he is human. This is most evident in his relationship with Atreus. Most of the time he is cold, utilitarian with his son, but the game makes a point of showing how he is trying to be a good father. Ultimately, God of War isn't just a redemption story, it is also an origin story for Atreus. Both of these characters are fascinating and their relationship is the core of the game. Their goal is a simple one, but the obstacles that stand in their way are fantastical. The interaction between the two is consistently compelling as well. They have an interesting dynamic where Atreus has to teach his father about this new world, while Kratos is trying to teach Atreus how to survive. This story is about being a parent in ways. It is Kratos learning to connect with his son and trying to be better for him. On the other hand, it's about growing up, the realization that your parents aren't perfect. Complementing this core relationship are the peripheral characters. Sony Santa Monica have done a great job of using these characters to counterweight Kratos' rather somber tone. They are charming and comical but believable. They bounce off of Kratos and Atreus in interesting ways as well. They turn Kratos' straightforward tone from boring into a kind of deadpan humour. They're also fantastic at filling in the history of this world, and it is a fantastic world. God of War takes place in the world of Norse mythology. Much like the Greece of previous games, the gods are impetuous, selfish and brutal. Figures like Odin and Thor are not gods you want to get involved with. It is considerably colder than Greece though, and absolutely beautiful in a stark and unfeeling way. This combination of a barren snow wasteland, decrepit yet stunning architecture, and mysterious magic make it a world that is worth exploring just for the beauty. But there are other reasons too. There are challenging but not frustrating puzzles that break up the pace of combat. Despite not being a true open world, there are a lot of side paths that are worth exploring. There are even entire side quests to complete, a lot of which give you better insight into the world and those fantastic side characters I was talking about earlier. Not to mention some sick loot. The clever thing about all of this is that none of it is necessary, but if you are really captivated by this world, there's plenty of it to sink your teeth into. This goes for the difficulty as well. The most difficult combat challenges you can face in God of War are in specific side quests, allowing players who really want to test themselves to seek it out, and those that aren't just sort of stick to the main path. God of War is more than I could have possibly hoped for. It takes a one-note character and breathes life into him, and brings him into a new and fascinating world. The combat is satisfying and brutal, the story is bombastic but also personal and touching, all with a fantastically varied and interesting cast of characters. Ultimately, it is an experience worthy of anyone's attention. If you haven't smashed your way through this stunning Norse world, give it a go. Or if you've played it, let me know what you thought in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for a new game recommendation every week.